He didn't expect her to say that name. Trump had weathered storms before: scandals, lawsuits, headlines soaked in chaos. He thought this would be no different. Just another televised game of political dodgeball where he got to throw punches and walk away untouched. He leaned back in that chair like it belonged to him. That smirk, the one the cameras had memorized for years, sat stretched across his face like armor. It was the kind of grin that said, "I've already won." But Jasmine Crockett wasn't built for theater. She didn't come for ratings. She came for reckoning. And then she said it. One word. One name. Tiffany. Trump blinked. Not slow. Not thoughtful. Just fast, like something got in his eye. But it wasn't his eye. It was his past. It hit him with the precision of someone who had done her homework not just to debate, but to disarm. That name cracked something. Because you don't bring up Tiffany. Not in the way people bring up Ivanka, polished and paraded like a trophy. Tiffany was the one he kept in the shadows, acknowledged but never embraced. Recognized but never claimed. That name held weight. Not political weight, personal. And Jasmine dropped it like a scalpel on stone. Clean. Cold. Surgical. Trump tried to recover, shifting in his seat, adjusting his cuff like that would fix the earthquake she just triggered. But it didn't. Because Crockett wasn't staring at him like an opponent. She looked at him like a surgeon who already knew where the wound was. He thought the cameras were his. He thought the crowd was his. He thought the moment was his to mock and spin and shrug. But Jasmine had walked in with something more powerful than a mic. She had truth. And she had it sealed in an envelope and etched into a daughter's silence. And now it was climbing into the room like smoke no one could stop. He didn't expect her to say that name. But once she did, everything changed. Because some names don't just echo, they haunt. And this one? It was about to unravel the man behind the mask. "Let's talk about Tiffany," she said. 3 words, softly spoken, but they sliced through the room like broken glass. Not Ivanka, the polished heiress with the White House shadow. Not Melania, the first lady everyone watched but never really heard. Tiffany, the daughter who was always there, but never really invited. And when Jasmine Crockett said that name, the walls didn't echo, they tightened. The kind of tight that pulls at your chest before your brain even catches up. Trump didn't move at first, but his body betrayed him. His left eye twitched, just a flicker. His lips held the smirk, frozen like they'd been glued in place, but his hands clenched hard. The knuckles went pale. His fingers locked around the edge of the desk like they were trying to hold onto the moment before it slipped into something he couldn't control. The room didn't explode. No gasps, no chaos. Just a silence that felt too clean. It wasn't just quiet, it was surgical. That kind of stillness that happens when everyone knows they've just crossed into forbidden territory. Reporters stopped scribbling. Phones stopped flashing. Even the people who usually whispered behind their hands just listened. Because you don't bring up Tiffany. Not in that room. Not in front of cameras. Not unless you're holding something real. She was the name he'd never weaponized. The daughter he never paraded on campaign trails. The child who grew up on the outskirts of his empire, with his blood in her veins but his name barely in her mouth. And Jasmine, with that razor-sharp calm, had just pulled her into the center of the spotlight. Trump shifted, just a little. He tried to look amused, but his face couldn't quite keep up with the performance. His eyes darted for half a second, maybe toward his team, maybe toward an exit. But there was none. Not here. Not now. Jasmine wasn't asking a question. She was announcing a reckoning. And the moment she said Tiffany, the entire game changed. Because some truths don't arrive with volume. They arrive with names. And this one just kicked down the door. Jasmine didn't blink. Not once. Not when the cameras zoomed in. Not when staffers exchanged glances like they'd just felt a shift in gravity. She just moved with that rare stillness, the kind that doesn't demand silence but creates it. And then, as if guided by a force far older than politics, she reached into her folder and placed something on the desk. A cream-colored envelope. No markings, no labels. Thin, almost fragile. But the way she laid it down, deliberate, slow, steady, it may as well have been a grenade with the pins still inside. It didn't make a sound when it touched the table. But somehow, everyone heard it. The weight of it wasn't in grams. It was in secrets. In consequences. In history. That envelope didn't just land, it hovered. It became the center of the room without moving a single inch. She didn't open it. Didn't even gesture toward it. She let it breathe. Let it exist between her and Trump like a ghost that had finally been invited into the light. It sat there, quiet and alive, pulsing with the kind of energy you feel in your bones before your mind catches up. Trump leaned back in his chair. He tried to look casual, the practiced shoulder roll, the slight smirk return, the slow blink of someone pretending boredom. But his performance was failing. Because his eyes, they never left that envelope. Not once. It had him, and everyone knew it. The same man who towered in boardrooms, who danced through depositions with smirks and shrugs, was suddenly face to face with something he couldn't outtalk, outrun, or outspin. He looked at it like it might move, like it might speak first. But Jasmine never rushed it. She let that envelope settle in like truth often does, quiet, heavy, and undeniable. Because when you've spent a lifetime hiding things behind walls of money, lawyers, and noise, nothing is more dangerous than silence, and a woman unafraid to break it. "You made a habit of hiding people who didn't fit your brand," she said. The words didn't come out like an attack. They came out like an incision, sharp, careful, exact. Jasmine's voice wasn't raised, but it didn't need to be. It had the precision of a scalpel and the weight of a courtroom oath. She didn't flinch, didn't perform. She just delivered, like someone who had waited long enough for the noise to die so the truth could finally speak. "You called women gold diggers, called immigrants, criminals," she continued, eyes locked on Trump. "You mocked war heroes. You danced around indictments. You branded everything you touched, buildings, stakes, water, even people." She leaned forward just slightly, not to threaten but to steady the room. "But when the daughter you didn't claim grew up with questions and silence, where were you?" The question didn't rise like drama. It sank like stone. Trump didn't answer, couldn't. His face went still, too still. Not the poker face he used on stage, no. This was something else. A flicker in his eyes. A corner of the mouth that twitched, almost like a memory tried to claw its way out and got stuck. He looked smaller suddenly, like someone who didn't expect the past to walk into the room wearing heels and holding sealed evidence. Jasmine let the moment breathe, not to gloat, but to grieve. Because this wasn't just about politics. It wasn't even just about Trump. It was about every girl who grew up staring at a door that never opened. Every daughter taught to believe silence was a father's form of love. Every woman who watched the world clap for men who never showed up when it mattered most. "This isn't about scandal," Jasmine said, her tone never changing. "It's about the cost of being erased, about the pain of growing up half-claimed, half-known, and fully invisible." Trump shifted, but the room didn't. The tension didn't. The truth didn't. Because she wasn't asking for answers anymore. She was writing them into the record, line by line, word by word. And he knew the story wasn't his to control anymore. Trump shook his head, scoffed. "Ridiculous," he muttered. "I know all my kids." The words stumbled out too fast, like they were trying to outrun something. They were meant to sound confident, dismissive, final, but they didn't land that way. Not this time. Because behind that practiced scoff was something else. A crack, hairline, small, almost invisible to the average ear. But Jasmine wasn't average, and she was listening. She caught it. The catch in his voice, the tightness in the throat that didn't match the swagger in his words. It wasn't a breakdown. It wasn't a confession. It was something far more dangerous for a man like Trump to tell. Because you can train a smirk, but not a tremor. You can memorize a script, but not bury a heartbeat. The moment stretched. He leaned back harder in the chair, as if posture alone could rebuild control. He scoffed again, but this time it sounded thinner, like it needed backup. Like even he didn't believe it. His hands moved adjusting the mic, straightening a cuff, pretending the air wasn't changing around him. But it was. Everyone could feel it. Jasmine didn't pounce. She didn't even blink. She let the silence sit beside him, wrap around him, show him what it felt like when truth started seeping through the cracks. And it was leaking now through his voice, through his body language, through that desperate urge to reclaim the room with bravado that suddenly felt old. "I know all my kids," he'd said. But the room had already heard what he didn't say. And Jasmine? She wasn't after the lie. She was after what it cost him to tell it. That's what shook him. Not the question. Not the envelope. The fact that she heard the break before he did. And in that split second, the silence told the story louder than any denial ever could. She tapped the envelope once, just once, and the sound was softer than a whisper, but somehow it echoed. It wasn't a flourish. It wasn't for show. It was a signal, like the sound a judge makes before a verdict, like the last click of a lock before the truth opens wide. "This contains birth records," she said, and her voice didn't waver, it sliced. "Letters, financial transfers, and a sworn statement from the woman you dated in '89. The air thickened. Trump blinked. Fast. Once. Then again. Twice. The kind of blinking that's less about dust in the eyes and more about time stalling, like the brain trying to buffer while panic surges beneath the surface. And Jasmine saw it. Everyone saw it. But she recognized it because it was his tell. He wasn't slipping because of what she said. He was slipping because he knew it was true. This wasn't a headline anymore. This wasn't a rumor spun out by a late-night host or a Twitter thread built from rage. This was paperwork, dates, names, bank trails, testimonies, ink and signatures and undeniable timelines. He wasn't losing grip on the envelope. He was losing grip on control. The thing he had always weaponized: the room, the cameras, the mic, the moment it was slipping from his fingers like water. And for the first time, his usual shields weren't working. The smirk didn't fit. The posture didn't intimidate. The air around him didn't bend, it pushed back. Jasmine didn't need to yell. She didn't need to prove she had him. The envelope was already doing it for her. Each second it sat there, unopened but undeniable, was another brick falling out of the wall he'd built around that part of his past. And maybe the records were still sealed. But the truth? It was already spilling. Right across his face. Right across the silence. And all he could do was blink. Jim Jordan shifted in his seat. Subtle at first, just a lean, a glance. But it wasn't nerves. It was calculation. Like he was silently checking the exits of a room that had just started to burn. His hand moved to his pen, not to write, but to fidget. A tell of his own. Because even he didn't know what was coming next, and that made him dangerous, or terrified. Marjorie leaned sideways and whispered something to a staffer. Urgent. Sharp. Her eyes narrowed, lips barely moving. But her body was stiff. Rigid, like someone trying to hold a dam from bursting. This wasn't performative outrage. This wasn't her usual thunder. It was quiet panic. And then there was Eric. He looked lost. Not angry. Not even defensive. Just confused. Like the air around him had changed languages and no one gave him subtitles. He kept darting his eyes from the envelope to his father to Jasmine, like trying to piece together a puzzle he never knew existed. Because even he didn't know this part of the story. And that's what hit the hardest. This wasn't one of those scandals with a script. This wasn't a recycled headline or a political stunt. There was no strategy binder for this one. No spin cycle ready to wash it clean. It wasn't politics, it was family. It wasn't talking points, it was blood. You could feel it. This wasn't choreographed chaos. It was real, raw, unprepared. And in that rawness, in that quiet unraveling, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just holding a document, she was holding dominance. Not by shouting, not by grandstanding, by delivering what none of them expected, something they couldn't rehearse for. The room wasn't shifting because she was louder. It was shifting because for once they had no playbook, no counter, no way out. And every second that envelope remained untouched, they knew the damage had already begun. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She didn't tilt her head in triumph or widen her voice to soak in the moment. She simply leaned forward, slow, steady, deliberate, the kind of calm that comes not from confidence, but from clarity. From knowing the truth is not something you have to decorate, just reveal. Her eyes didn't even blink when she spoke. She didn't want money, Jasmine said, and every syllable carried a weight money could never buy. Didn't ask for press. She just wanted to know why her name never left your lips. And then nothing. Not a cough. Not a breath. Not a shift of fabric from the seats. Nothing moved. Nothing dared to. Because that silence howled. It screamed louder than any courtroom gavel, any tweet, any televised tantrum. It pierced through the stage makeup, through the defenses built on decades of distractions. It wasn't just awkward. It was sacred. A moment where everyone in that room, ally, critic, staffer, bystander, felt it. This wasn't about policy. This wasn't about elections. This wasn't even about the envelope anymore. This was about a daughter, a child who spent birthdays wondering why a man with towers, planes, and press conferences couldn't spare one moment to say her name. A girl who carried the weight of erasure on her shoulders, while the world watched her father soak in spotlight after spotlight. And now, that name long buried in shadows had been spoken. Not by Trump, but by the woman he tried to belittle, by the woman he dismissed. And the irony cut deep, because the thing he never gave, recognition, acknowledgment, a voice, was now roaring through Jasmine's steady, razor-clear presence. And as that silence grew louder, so did the truth. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is the thing they refuse to. We traced the tuition payments, she continued, her voice still calm, not cold, not cruel, just honest, piercingly honest. They were made through a shell company, disguised, quiet, hidden. The words landed like raindrops on a metal roof, gentle in sound, but hard, impossible to ignore, and relentless in what they revealed. There was no drama in her tone, no fury, but that made it worse. Because truth, when told, without emotion, without agenda, just as it is, it becomes a mirror. And in that moment, Trump was staring into one he didn't ask for. This wasn't just about money. This was about what money tried to erase. Not protection, not privacy, distance. The kind of money that doesn't bring people closer, it builds walls. That pays for silence, not for presence. That tells a teenage girl, you're seen, but not publicly. You're cared for, but not claimed. And Jasmine didn't have to say all that. It was written between the receipts, between the bank transfers, between the lies crafted by lawyers and accountants who'd never have to look that girl in the eye. While the world saw his children grinning on magazine covers, playing on stages, marrying into empires, one daughter watched from behind a screen, wondering why her smile wasn't part of the brand, why her face was too inconvenient for legacy. And every payment made in secret said the same thing louder than any press release ever could. You exist, but don't speak. Jasmine let it sit, didn't rush the silence. Because in that quiet, everyone finally heard her. The girl who had been paid to disappear had finally, through Jasmine, been seen. Trump snapped. Enough, he barked, loud enough to make some jump. It wasn't just volume, it was fear inside fury. His face flushed deep red, a kind of anger that had more to do with panic than control. He pointed, waved, tried to command the moment like he always had, like the room still answered to him. But this time, no one moved. Not Jasmine, not the chair, not even the air. Because Jasmine didn't even blink. She stood like a mountain does in a storm still, rooted, unmoved. And that drove him madder. Because the louder he got, the clearer it became. This wasn't power anymore. It was desperation. The kind that bubbles up when every lie starts folding in on itself, and no one's stepping in to stop it. The kind of shout that doesn't silence others, it just exposes you. And Jasmine? She knew. She'd seen it before. When men shout, it's not to lead. It's not to protect. It's to cover the sound of the truth banging on the door. It's to smother the one thing they can't spin, being caught. Trump's roar didn't intimidate. It echoed, sure, but it echoed off stone, off composure, off a woman who brought facts instead of fear. And that silence around his scream, that stillness in the room, that was everyone hearing it. Not the words, but what was underneath them. The unraveling. The snap wasn't about Jasmine. It was about the truth finally stepping into the light, and him realizing far too late that he couldn't shout it back into the dark. She wrote you letters, Jasmine said softly, so softly it made the silence heavier. Heavier because it wasn't just her words the room was hearing, it was the weight behind them. The ache of a girl's unanswered hope floating in every syllable. She even tried to meet you once, secretly, in D.C. A pause. Not for effect, but because some truths walk in slowly. You walked past her. A single breath later, Jasmine added, she remembers your cologne, but not your face. And that line shattered something. Not loudly, not like glass breaking, but like the soft, unbearable crack of something sacred caving in. Phones that had been held high now lowered, as if the people behind them felt ashamed to capture something so human, so raw. Staffers who'd been taking notes stopped mid-sentence, pens hovering over paper like even ink didn't know what to do next. Even the chairman, the one supposed to moderate the chaos, keep order, didn't interrupt. He couldn't. Because this wasn't a hearing anymore. It was a reckoning. A father had passed his own child on a crowded street, and all she remembered was a scent. Not a word. Not a hug. Not a glance. She didn't even get his eyes. And that image of a girl standing in the wind, maybe holding on to hope one last time as he passed by without knowing, settled into the room like dust in a cathedral. Slow, inevitable, untouchable. No headline could carry that weight. No soundbite could capture that wound. Only silence could. And Jasmine let it stretch. Because finally, the world wasn't watching a politician debate. They were witnessing a daughter be remembered. And a man realized he'd already been forgotten by the one person who mattered most. Then Jasmine finally opened the envelope. Not with a flourish. Not like it was a weapon. But like it was sacred. Like something fragile had been waiting too long to breathe. Her fingers moved carefully, gently, peeling the seal back like one might unwrap a wound that had scabbed over, not to cause pain, but to finally let it heal. She didn't look at Trump. She didn't need to, because this moment wasn't for him anymore. She looked at the camera, straight through it, into the hearts of everyone watching. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't crack. But it held something no mic could ever amplify: truth born in pain. She read, "To the man I know as my father, why was I never enough for your love, only your money?" And just like that, the entire room collapsed into a stillness. So complete it felt like the world had been placed on mute. No one breathed. No one blinked. Because in those 17 words was a childhood. 1,000 nights waiting for a call that never came. Birthdays passed with a wrapped gift and no return address. Photos cut from magazines, hoping to find herself in the face of a man she could only claim in private. And now, that voice was no longer hidden in an envelope. It was out. It was loud. Not in sound, but in soul. The kind of loud that echoes down corridors of power and privilege and shame. Jasmine held the letter open. But it wasn't the paper people were staring at, it was the question. Why was I never enough? Not for fame. Not for fortune. Just for a name. A hand. A moment. And as those words hung in the air, Trump didn't speak. Because what do you say to that? There's no counterpoint to a daughter's ache. No argument against being unclaimed. There was only Jasmine, standing strong, holding the truth in one hand and the silence in the other. And for the first time, the man who always had the last word had nothing left to say. The words hit like thunder wrapped in velvet. They didn't explode. They didn't echo off the walls like some courtroom outburst. No, they sank. Deep. Slow, heavy, like water soaking into stone. Not shouted, just heard, truly heard. The kind of words that don't need volume because the truth in them is so raw, so undeniably human, it silences everything around it. You could feel it not just in the room, but in the chest, in the throat, in the spine. Staffers looked down at their notes, suddenly unsure what they were even writing anymore. Security guards shifted their weight, as if trying to ground themselves through the floor. And reporters, those trained to stay neutral, paused. Pens down, cameras still, because no lens could capture what just broke. Trump lowered his eyes for the first time all day. Not to check a phone, not to shuffle papers. Just down. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't rehearsed. It was instinct. The same way people lower their gaze when they see something they wish they hadn't. Something that peels back their armor and shows them the part of themselves they never wanted the world to see. Regret. Not for the cameras. Not for the voters. Not for the consequences. But for the first time, maybe the only time, it looked like regret for the person. The girl. The one who sent letters. The one who waited outside the hotel. The one who remembered the scent, but not the eyes. Jasmine didn't press. She didn't lean in. She didn't exploit the silence. She let him sit in it. Because that silence didn't belong to her. It belonged to him. And for once, Donald Trump had to face something without a microphone, without a rally, without a spin team. Just a question. From a daughter. That didn't need an answer. Because the world already heard it. Jasmine placed the letter down like it was made of glass. Not because it was fragile, but because it carried something sacred, unanswered pain. It deserved care. It deserved weight. She didn't fold it. Didn't shove it away like paperwork to be processed. She set it down gently, as if that one page had been holding someone's whole life because it had. She didn't ask for sympathy. There were no tears in her eyes, no trembling lip, no dramatics. She asked for accountability. And that's what made the room shift. Not explode, not collapse, just shift. Because accountability doesn't make people cheer. It doesn't give them a comfortable place to hide. It walks up to their front door, knocks once, and waits. Not with anger, but with evidence. It doesn't beg. It doesn't plead. It stands still and asks, "Now what are you going to do with this truth?" That's why the room felt colder. Because everyone from the aides scribbling in margins to the congressmen stiff in their seats felt something they hadn't prepared for, a mirror. And mirrors don't lie. You could see it in the way shoulders tightened, the way phones weren't lifted, the way the usual smirks were suddenly gone. Because Jasmine didn't come to destroy a man. She came to deliver the weight he'd been dodging. To remind him and everyone else that silence doesn't erase people, that power doesn't equal presence, and that a forgotten daughter's voice, when finally heard, is louder than any headline, any tweet, any speech. Accountability doesn't clap. It confronts. And in that confrontation, as the letter lay between them, untouchable, even the mighty were forced to sit with their choices. No escape. No applause. Just the truth. And the unbearable quiet that followed. Then she looked back at him, not like an opponent trying to win, not like a politician scoring points, not even like someone angry. She looked at him the way a mirror looks at a man. It doesn't argue, it just reflects. No emotion, no agenda, just the unfiltered image of who you really are when all the noise fades. And Trump, the man known for talking over anyone, for filling silence with bravado and bluster, sat there, finally faced with something he couldn't interrupt. His own reflection. She wasn't standing above him. She wasn't pointing. She just looked. With the stillness of someone who knew, fully knew what it meant to be overlooked, unheard, dismissed, and still rise. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You call everyone a liar," she said, "whenever you feel the truth getting too close." The words landed sharp, but clean. No malice, just precision. Like someone who had spent too many years listening to lies and finally chose to speak with facts. Her eyes didn't blink. They didn't break contact. Because this wasn't about shaming a man, it was about naming a pattern. And this truth, she added, quieter now, but more cutting than before, doesn't need your permission to exist. That line stopped something. The cameras didn't move. The papers didn't rustle. The coughs and whispers and political posturing all froze. Because truth like that doesn't ask to be allowed in the room. It walks in, uninvited, and it stays. Trump looked back at her, but for the first time really looked and found no weakness to twist, no crack to exploit. Just a woman holding up a mirror and refusing to look away first. And in that moment, the man who built his name on dominance, on always being louder, sharper, faster, lost without saying a word. Trump tried to speak. His mouth opened just slightly the way it always did before a pivot, before a punchline, before a press-ready comeback. But this time, nothing came out. Not a word, not a breath of spin, not even the usual scoff or sarcasm he kept holstered for moments just like this. His lips parted like they had somewhere to go, some defense to launch, but all that stood between thought and sound was a wall of truth he hadn't prepared for. His throat tightened, not from rage, from realization. Because in all his years, all the courtrooms, boardrooms, green rooms, he had never been faced with this kind of silence. The kind not made by fear, but by power that didn't need to raise its voice. Jasmine hadn't shouted. She hadn't begged. She had revealed. And now there was nowhere to run. No staffer to intercept. No podium to duck behind. Just him, in a room that finally stopped bending to his voice. The silence didn't ask for sympathy. It demanded something far harder. Ownership. And that more than any evidence, more than any envelope, was what stunned him still. Because for the first time in his life, Donald Trump wasn't the storm. He was standing in the eye of someone else's. One built not on chaos, but on clarity. And in that moment, as his voice failed him, as the cameras kept rolling, as the nation held its breath, the world saw something they never thought possible. Donald Trump, finally speechless. "She doesn't need your name," Jasmine said. Not with venom, not with spite, but with the kind of calm that only comes from living through abandonment and choosing not to let it define you. She already carries your silence. The line didn't echo, it settled. Like dust on a truth no one dared to wipe clean. That silence wasn't just a gap in sound. It was a childhood, a waiting room, a question that grew taller than the girl asking it. It was birthdays passed with quiet cake, questions met with shrugs, college essays written without a father's name, wedding invitations mailed with blank spaces. She didn't just grow up without his voice. She grew around it. That silence, his silence, had shape, weight, memory. And yet, Jasmine didn't wield it like a weapon. She honored what that silence had forged, and she turned it into strength. Not the kind that bullies wear, not the kind that shows up in suits and shouts, the kind that bends, but doesn't break, the kind that builds a life out of unanswered questions, the kind that wakes up every day and still chooses grace. The room didn't know what to do with that sentence, because it didn't belong in a political hearing. It belonged in a journal, a graveyard, a late-night phone call. It wasn't a punch, it was a reminder. That real strength doesn't need permission. It doesn't wait for headlines or hashtags. It's born in silence and revealed in moments just like this. Trump looked at her, eyes narrowed not in anger, but in something closer to confusion. Because for the first time, he realized this wasn't about him. It was about the girl he never claimed, and the woman who stood in her place, speaking the truth he could never silence. The chairman shifted, not out of routine, but out of discomfort. Like his seat had suddenly become too small for the weight settling into the room. He glanced at the aides nearby. They weren't typing, not flipping through notes, just watching. Still, staffers glanced around nervously. Some stared down at their tablets, pretending to scroll. Others looked toward the cameras, as if unsure whether this moment should be broadcast or protected. Because this wasn't policy. This wasn't party. This was something messier. This was real. And real doesn't come with talking points. The air thickened, not with outrage, but with recognition. Everyone in that chamber, from the front row to the back wall, felt it. A line had been crossed, not one of decorum, but of denial. They had stepped out of the theater of politics and straight into a wound that had never been bandaged. This wasn't about bills, or scandals, or strategy. It was about a girl who waited for a father's voice and never heard it. And now, through Jasmine, she finally spoke, not with vengeance, but with dignity. The microphones stayed on, but no one dared cut in. Not because they were silenced, but because they were humbled. The power in that room had shifted, not toward a party, not toward a podium, but toward a truth so human it broke through the noise like sunlight through stained glass. No one clapped, no one cleared their throat, because in that moment, everyone understood. This wasn't political anymore. It was personal, and it was undeniable. Jasmine picked up the envelope, slowly, deliberately, not rushed, not dramatic, just steady, like someone tucking away something sacred, like someone handling a relic, not a prop. She didn't wave it, didn't hold it over his head. She simply slipped it back into her folder. Not to hide it, not to protect him, not to retreat, but to mark the moment, to say, this part is done. The silence has been named. The truth has been spoken, and it no longer needs to scream to be heard. She closed the folder without looking down, her eyes never leaving the space Trump sat in, not staring at him, but at everything he represented. Everything that had tried to bury this truth in time, in money, in denial. But the truth wasn't buried anymore. It was filed. Filed into history. Filed into record. Filed into a moment that would be played back long after the microphones went cold and the news cycle moved on. That folder, now holding more than just documents, held reckoning. And Jasmine made it clear without saying another word. You don't have to scream the truth when it's finally been heard. She didn't walk away with triumph. She walked away with clarity. And in that silence, everyone knew this wasn't just a folder. It was a receipt. Stamped, filed, remembered. She ended with no rage, no finger-pointing, no grandstanding or gloating or performance. Just stillness, the kind that isn't empty, but full. Full of every unspoken truth, every untold story, every name that never made it to the dinner table. Her voice didn't rise. It lowered, soft, grounded. Because when you hold the truth, you don't need to shout it, you just need to stand in it. And Jasmine stood tall. She didn't look at Trump like an enemy. She didn't look at the cameras like a performer. She looked straight ahead, past the headlines, past the politics, past the posture, and said one line. No build-up, no echo, just a line that fell like the end of a prayer. Quiet, but complete. She never needed your approval to exist, only your acknowledgement, and you couldn't even give her that. And then, silence. Not awkward, not unsure. Sacred. Because everyone in that room, whether they agreed, disagreed, or didn't know how to feel, felt it. Felt the truth land. Not with noise, but with weight. And that's how Jasmine Crockett ended it. Not with fire, but with something far more dangerous to power. Grace backed by truth.